All right, Bruce. So Father's Day is coming up, and I know for the most part, your kids are all grown. But thinking back to when you first became a dad, like what was that season like for you?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, it's one of those things where you kind of realize how little you know. Like it's not inherent that when you become a parent that you know exactly what to do. I mean, I definitely dove into it and I started reading books about it, and I even took a class on child development at the University of Maryland. I wanted to learn as much as I could possibly learn about how to do right by my kids. There's this sort of sense that it's just inherent, and it just isn't. You really don't know what you're doing when you first become a parent.
First, I can completely see you taking a class. Like that's a very Bruce Lesley thing to do. And I'm sure even with all the books and the courses, like no one can really prepare you. So then you had your first child, and that's real life on the job training.
Yeah, people tell you that your whole life changes, and even though they tell you that, you don't really know the extent of how true that is. But other parents are also just great sources of wisdom. So, it's other moms and dads and your own parents who really help you think through what is it you're doing and how do you deal with the crying baby and all the things that you need to get and deal with.
Yeah, my favorite was catch up on sleep while you can, because once the baby comes, it's over. And unfortunately, there's no real way to bank sleep. But happy Father's Day, Bruce. You're a great dad.
Oh, thank you. From First Focus on Children, this is Speaking of Kids. I'm Bruce Lesley.
And I'm Masela Chlubi. Speaking of Kids is a podcast that puts kids at the center of public policy.
There's one thing that isn't usually talked about when it comes to Father's Day that I think is really important, and that is the role that feminism has played in sort of changing families.
Interesting.
I would say that for this generation, right, parenting is shared more by moms and dads. It's still not even close to 50-50, but men are playing a bigger role. And I think we see that as every generation passes. My dad probably did not change a single diaper, whereas I probably changed, 35% of them or 40% of them. So not quite parity still, and it should get to that. But I think that people are now understanding the role that dads play as a caregiver themselves. And that's really been important, I think, in our advocacy. And we're seeing that with today's guest.
I can understand that. I mean, as the term and kind of the revolution around feminism has expanded over the last several decades, I think that is an interesting point, Bruce. One that definitely doesn't get connected or highlighted during Father's Day, but absolutely. I mean, as women have started to work outside of the home more, and in some cases are the head of their household, the role of what that means for fathers has drastically shifted. In my home, as much as possible, we've tried to keep things 50-50.
Yeah, you can see it in the polling too. And so when we ask voters, like, are you supportive of things like family medical leave and childcare and those kinds of things, you see a huge gender gap with older populations. And so women get it and get the problems and the challenges faced with parenthood and how hard it is, whereas men less so because they just weren't really that engaged in it. And so you'll see like a 40% gap in things like family medical leave and childcare, where women are wildly supportive of the role of society in helping with those sort of systems, whereas older men, not as much. But what we're beginning to see is that that's changing with younger men. And so in our polling, like under 35 crowd, men are almost as strongly supportive of, these children's issues as women have been. And so that's a sea change and a real big difference. And the way it's played out in our Champions for Children legislative scorecard that we've talked about on past episodes is that women are about 2.5 times more likely to be a champion for children than men. And what we're hoping is that with this change, that new generations of men will also understand, because they played a little bit more of a role in their families, that they get how hard this is and that they will also be big supporters.
Absolutely. And I think you alluded to this, is a lot of these policies and these shifts that we're advocating for oftentimes benefit the whole family structure. And I think that family structure and dynamic as it relates to feminism and the role that feminism has played over the last several decades has required the shift even, within a family. So now men increasingly are seeing, oh, wow, well, parental leave is a benefit to me too, right? And to the family and to the bottom line of the economics. I know we do a lot in budget and tax and family economics, period. And this is one of those issues where if it works for one, it will work for both. And by default, for the whole family unit and structure.
Yeah. And our guest today really exemplifies this. He's a member of Congress, Representative Jimmy Gomez, and he is a father of a young child, very young child, and he and his wife were all about, we're going to do sharing, and we're going to both support the raising of our child. And so he has been seen in a lot of pictures with his kid in a baby Bjorn, carrying his kid to meetings with the president or at State of the Union. And I think that he and some of the other fathers, they have for the first time created the Dads Caucus, which is really exciting.
I absolutely love those images and normalizing that that's how it is in some cases. And when it's your day, it's your day.
Yep, that's right. So no matter what you're doing, you got to play your role. So we're really excited to have Representative Jimmy Gomez. He created the Dads Caucus, and one of the things I think the Dads Caucus will play a role in is really stepping up and getting more men in Congress to be supportive of some of these issues for kids that we've been talking about on the podcast. And hopefully that'll be game-changing because women have always been much stronger on the issue. And if we can get more men in Congress to support kids, we'll be in a better position.
Definitely. I'm very excited for this interview. Congressman Jimmy Gomez represents California's 34th District, an incredibly diverse chunk of Los Angeles from Koreatown to Chinatown to Dodger Stadium and Skid Row. Congressman Gomez is the founder and chair of the Congressional Dads Caucus.
Congressman Gomez, thank you so much for joining the Speaking of Kids podcast.
Yeah, thank you for having me.
Absolutely. Well, we I just wanted to start off by telling our listeners that Congressman Gomez is a huge friend of First Focus on Children, got our award for being a champion for children this year. And we really thank you, Congressman, for all your great work on behalf of children. And I just wanted to start off by talking about your role as a champion for children, but also, we know, and that kids are often an afterthought in the halls of Congress. Was that one of the reasons why you decided to create the Dads Caucus?
Well, I decided to start the Dads Caucus after my son and I went viral on the House floor when I was carrying him in a baby carrier during the 15 rounds of votes for the speaker back in the beginning of 2023. And I realized that, I didn't want this viral moment to happen where I got a lot of praise for doing something that women had always done, which is work and take care of their kids. But how can I use it as a moment to create a movement around getting dads who are elected officials to be more active when it comes to fighting for policies at the federal level and also doing more on the home front to take care of their children. And I've worked on these issues for a while. When I was in the state legislature, I expanded paid family leave. I actually made one of the most progressive in the country by changing the wage replacement so that people who made less got a higher percentage of their income. And that was, people consider that revolutionary. And now a lot of the programs across the country are following that model. But when I got to Congress, I wanted to work on paid family leave. And what happened was I would go and talk to somebody about paid family leave, and they were like, oh, thank you for bringing it up, but, it's covered, right? Because there's people who have been here for a long time. And it was also, I got that sense when I was in the legislature. If you're a man trying to work on these issues, sometimes people look at you kind of with a weird look. But you know what? I was going to work on this issue because I know what it means when a parent can't take time off from work to take care of a sick child or to bond with a new child, and that they have to give up paychecks. Because when I was about 7 years old, I ended up getting sick with pneumonia, spent a week in the hospital, and my parents didn't want me to be there by myself. And what they did is they took turns taking time off from work and missing shifts, but that really put a burden on our family because we were not paycheck to paycheck, but, we didn't have a lot of extra income. And then when we found out how much we had to pay for the hospital bills, that was a double whammy that we weren't prepared. So I was always interested in these issues, but I just didn't feel like there was enough space to kind of be an advocate or bring dads into the mix. And there's something called default parenting. I always tell people that I learned this concept when my wife and I started having a discussion about having our son Hodge or having a baby, that what would the division of labor look like? And she was very clear. She didn't want us to live like where automatically she would be the default parent, that she would be the one who takes him to the hospital when he's sick, that takes time off when he needs to go to a doctor's appointment, or thinking about what kind of meals he's going to get for the week. And that is a common, I would say, tension in relationships about, that default parent, which often falls on the mother. I also noticed that there's a default legislating here in Congress, where because women have been fighting the fight in the halls of Congress for paid family leave, child care for our families and our children, they'll be the ones that introduce the legislation. They're the ones that will be putting pressure to make sure that this gets passed. And the dads kind of were hanging back. And what I wanted to see is that, no, there's not going to be default legislating. We're gonna step up. So it was based on those simple concepts. Dads need to do more, plain and simple. And I think that it also reflects that Congress is changing. Now members are younger. Members are entering Congress with children, both men and women. And we need to be at the table and able to share our experiences, but also act as strong allies to individuals like Rosa DeLauro and other folks that have been fighting the good fight for a long time. And I think that will help change the discussion that this is, just, a children's issue, or this is just a woman's issue. No, this is a family issue, and this is a American issue. This is about economic competitiveness. It's about workforce. It's about fairness. So I think that us getting the Dads Caucus being more active helps bring more people to the table. But also we recognize that there's champions like Rosa DeLauro, Kathleen Clark, other people that have been fighting the fight on these policies for a long time. So we're a little late to the dance, but we've made it onto the dance floor.
That's been really important. And one of the statistics we talk about a lot at First Focus is exactly what you're talking about, that women in Congress are 2.6 times more likely to be a champion for children than men. And, one of the things that I really am excited about the Dads Caucus playing a role here is bringing dads to the table and making them also champions like yourself. So how can our listeners and how can groups like First Focus on Children help support the Dads Caucus and help you in your efforts to really make dads a bigger player in the lives of kids in Congress? And also, as you said, at home.
I think one is if they're in districts that are with Republican legislators, encourage them to join the Dads Caucus. The Dads Caucus is not just for Democrats, even though it's only Democrats right now. It's also not just for dads. We actually have two mothers. We have Rashida Tlaib was one of the founding members, and then Brittany Pedersen is a newly joined member. So, and the reason it's so broad is that we want the diverse voices at the table, but also making dads, especially who are electeds, to, hey, you know what? I should speak up on paid family leave, on child care, on the child tax credit. And there are Republicans that are new dads, Dan Crenshaw. I'm giving him a space to do that before asking him to join the Dads Caucus, but encouraging them to join. And then at the same time, talk to members about the issues you care about. Just because they're a member of Congress who is a man or a dad shouldn't be less likely to care about these issues. Talk to them. Say, hey, I appreciate you stepping up and making your voice heard. That makes a difference, because oftentimes in these positions, we hear more about, what you're not doing versus what you're doing.
Yeah.
But the dads are committed. We have 35 members now. People are active. We write letters. We endorse bills. We wrote a letter regarding the lead in applesauce and the lead in Lunchables to the FDA, demanding some answers, trying to get ahead of it. We asked for changing tables across the Capitol so that people have, when they come here to lobby their members of Congress, they can bring their kids. So I'd say they should really just engage and ask these members to visit a child care center, to listen to parents. And also, if they're fathers or grandparents, that they should also speak up because they play such a vital role in raising children.
Also have really been impressed by the relationships you guys have created in Congress. And you've already mentioned Congresswoman DeLauro and Congresswoman Tlaib, and we helped on the first ever Dads Caucus, Mamas Caucus, and Babies Caucus briefing in the Library of Congress. So I know you guys are doing that work in partnership with them. So, do you want to talk a little bit about that, and what does that mean, and how are you going about that?
One of the things I recognize as starting the Dads Caucus is that we're not here to replace the efforts that are being championed by the Mamas Caucus, the Babies Caucus, the Women in the House Caucus. Like, they've been doing great work. We're just saying that we want to help. We want to be involved, as we don't want our spouses to do all the work at home. We don't want our colleagues to do all the work here. So developing those coalitions and putting together events with the Mamas Caucus are just crucial to saying, hey, this is an issue that is about children and it's about families. And that's kind of where we're at, where we're not trying to overtake anybody's bills or anything like that. We're like, Rosa DeLauro, you presented a bill. Okay, we endorsed her child tax credit bill. Catherine Clark, she had a bill that dealt with child care centers and investing billions of dollars. We're going to endorse that. We've led our own stuff where we think that we can just do something that would bring attention to an issue that nobody's talking about. But it is important that people see this as a joint effort. It brings extra attention. Rashida Tlaib once said, hey, the New York Times asked me, what does it mean to have the Dads Caucus forum? She's like, well, the New York Times never called me when it came to the Mamas Caucus, right? So yeah. I tell people it's also partly because there's a novelty to it. It's like man bites dog, still gets more attention, right? Dads take care of babies is still like mind-blowing to a lot of folks. Right. So we can help bring attention to, I would say, legislation and issues and events that maybe wouldn't get as much attention. It shouldn't be that way, but we're going to take advantage of it where we can.
Coming up after the break, Representative Gomez tells us what he saw his parents struggling with as he grew up.
They were working multiple jobs, but at the same time, they never made more than $38,000 jointly to raise 6 kids, to pay for the mortgage, the food. We never had health insurance growing up. And I really kind of wondered why things were the way they were.
Stick with us.
Making the world a better place for all children can seem like an impossibly huge task. Some of you may be thinking, I'm just one person. What could I possibly do to make a difference? I'm Layla Nimatala, Vice President of Advocacy and Mobilization at First Focus on Children. And I'm inviting you to join us and become one of our volunteer advocates, whom we call our ambassadors for children. Ambassadors are our most active child advocates who raise critical issues with the U.S. Congress and with the administration related to child policy and funding decisions, both for kids in the U.S. and worldwide. But don't take my word for it. We asked one of our ambassadors to share her experience.
Hello, my name is Annette Bridges, also known as Dr. B, and I live in Louisville, Kentucky. The welfare of children and their families is a deep concern for me and really always has been, especially those from marginalized communities. I care about equity in education, resources, and health. And I'm not quite sure what it's going to take for our elected officials to invest in our children. And I mean fully invest in our children. It really boils down to the haves and have-nots. It's a selfish attitude if an elected official does not consider children as a priority. I say selfish because, if you think about it, other countries with less resources can provide universal preschool as an option for families. Then why is it that our country can't do that as well? I am proud to be an ambassador for First Focus on Children because they are serious about the work they have done, are doing, and will do in the near future. Their efforts are relentless. Think about being an ambassador for them. being a voice for the voiceless. I can't think of anything else more worthy. Thanks for listening, and it's been my pleasure to talk about what is near and dear to my heart, and that is children. Thank you for your time.
So please join us, won't you? Check out campaignforchildren.org/ambassadors on how to become a First Focus on Children ambassador and to link up with our fabulous community of committed child advocates.
First Focus on Children is a bipartisan advocacy organization dedicated to making children and families the priority in federal policy and budget decisions.
First Focus moves beyond individual issues to serve a more important role, child advocacy. We educate lawmakers and the American public about the issues facing children today.
To learn more about our work and ways you can become an ambassador, go to firstfocus.org.
Coming up on State of Play, we will talk about Children's Week.
Well, I started off this whole conversation around the Champions for Children and the Dads Caucus, particularly since we're going to run this around Father's Day. But also just want to ask you, tell our listeners a little bit about Jimmy Gomez. What are your priorities right now and what brought you to the halls of Congress? I know you were a fantastic state legislator.
I guess it was just kind of how I grew up. Politics and policy is personal to me. My parents are from Mexico. They were immigrants. I had 4 of my siblings were born in Mexico. And my brother Javier and I were born here. And I saw my parents work multiple jobs to make ends meet. Like my mother would work a morning job and an evening job during the weekdays, and then a morning job and an evening job during the weekends. My dad would work oftentimes as a cook and would drive very far during the evenings on the weekdays, and then he would have a handyman job on the weekend. So they were working multiple jobs, but at the same time, they never made more than $38,000 jointly to raise 6 kids, to pay for the mortgage, the food. We never had health insurance growing up. And I really kind of wondered why things were the way they were, right? Why is it that my parents have to work nonstop, but still barely have the resources to make ends meet? Why can't we go on a family vacation when there's no vacation time? Why there's no sick time? And it kind of really, from an early age, made me question, why are things the way they are? And as I got older, I realized it was because of policies and government and politics, and that it's not something that's, predetermined. It's actually was created by the decisions that people had made over the years. And then it kind of made me think, if that's the case, then we can change it by making different decisions. And really thinking about kids and growing up and why do certain kids succeed and why don't they succeed? And I kind of came to a conclusion that oftentimes it seems that people's success or what they do in life is often determined by the randomness of their birth, right? Who they're born to, what year they're born, what part of the country, what school district. That randomness determines if they're going to, get to live to a certain age, graduate from high school. Are they going to go off to college? Are they going to be able to raise a family? And I think that we need to develop a country where your limitations or opportunities are not determined before you're ever even born, right? So that's why I worked for labor. I worked for the labor unions. I worked for nurses because I grew up without any health insurance. I wanted to make sure people had access. And why I kind of focused from my early days as an elected official, as an assembly member, on children. Even though I had no kids, I knew that I wanted to focus on helping children like myself that might have been born into families that didn't have a lot of resources to have every opportunity to succeed. And that starts at the very earliest stages, right? The ability of mothers to bond with their children, fathers to bond with their children, not to have the stress of not having income. I dedicated myself to helping kids. And the first time I tried to do something on paid family leave, I think people in California, they were like, you don't have kids and you're not a mother and you're not a woman. What's going on? And I think it was just kind of thinking back to my childhood that made me stay focused on it. Everything I worked on had that kind of lens. So when I did family leave expansion in California, I ended up getting elected to Congress. I said, okay, I'm going to work on paid family leave. I know California has a good program. Let's see if we can get it done at the federal level. I wasn't on the right committee, I'll be honest. I was on natural resources and oversight, and people were like, that's good. That's good, hun. Move aside because you have no power. But once I got onto Ways and Means, people were like, oh, you not only have an policy expertise, but you're also on the committee of jurisdiction. So then people started paying attention to me a little bit more. So my goal was always paid family leave. But I kind of learned about different programs when I got here. The child tax credit, amazing. When it was fully refundable, but also advanceable. Coming from a working class background, I know that money monthly means more than money a year from now after I file my taxes. Money monthly will be used for basic necessities. And how do I know that? Because I come from a working family. I know what my parents went through. That extra $250, $300 a month, would mean that they would be less stressed about making ends meet for buying food, paying the electricity bill, paying gas for the car, for insurance. And that will reduce the stress and make families better off. And the tax credit cut poverty by 40 to 60% based on the concept of equity, right? Getting the money to the people that need it the most. And then as a new dad, I was like, oh, childcare, it costs a lot of money. But I was looking at it from it's good to have children in childcare, especially quality, accessible, affordable childcare where kids can thrive and learn. But then I went to a policy retreat, the Ways and Means Democrats last year, and a former Secretary of the Treasury, Jack Lew, said that there's two things that are dragging down the growth of our GDP, our gross domestic product for the nation: childcare and housing cost. And so it's not just about helping families. It's also do we want to be economically competitive? Do we want our economy to grow so that it lifts all boats? Do we want to be able to make sure that people are not struggling? If that's the case, childcare has to be on top of the Democratic agenda. So the way I kind of view everything is through that children, family, and worker lens, right? How do you make our government work for them? And it all comes back to how I grew up, right?
Yeah.
Most people, they look at me now, they look that I went to Harvard for my master's, but they fail to realize that, I was the kid that had zero plans of going to college. I worked at Subway and Target after graduation, and a friend of mine goes, hey, you should consider going to community college. So he signed me up. He literally filled out my application for Riverside Community College. I took one class, and the rest is history. At first, I was a biochem major. I wanted to be a doctor because I grew up without health insurance. I wanted to take care of people.
Yeah.
And then a friend of mine, I went to a workshop in political activism, ended up running for president of the Honor Society, winning by one vote. And then the guy who I beat said, hey, why are you a biochem major? You should go into politics. And I said, well, I want to help people with healthcare. And he said, you can do that through politics. So I changed my major, and kind of the rest is history. It's all based on personal experiences, but it's also realizing that if we give children and families the resources early, there's nothing that can stop them from achieving great things. From just taking care of their families, providing for a stable house, reducing any kind of trauma, to maybe changing the course of history itself. So I know that, but it all comes down to what we do for our kids.
One thing we always love to ask our guests is, is there a song or songs that really keep you in the game and keep you fired up in your work?
I'm a dad of a 20-month-old toddler. His name is Hodge. And we have a hype song. It's called the Elmo Happy Dance Song.
Oh, awesome.
We listen to it every morning. So
that is awesome.
It's one of those songs that kind of gets into your ear, and then you even hear it when you're asleep. So it's both a hype song, and then at the same time doesn't let me go to bed when when it's time to go to sleep.
I totally understand that. I'm a father of four, and
do you remember those days?
Oh yeah. Absolutely. That's fantastic. Well, we are so grateful to you for joining us today and for all your great work as a champion in for your work in the Dads Caucus.
Thank you, Bruce.
This week on State of Play, we're chatting about Children's Week, which First Focus started several years ago. And the reason why we did that was that Senator Barbara Mikulski, who was a senator from Maryland, once told the child advocacy community that she can walk the halls of Congress and for weeks, if not months, no one brings up children. And we've talked about this on previous podcasts, is kids are so invisible. And so one of the ideas of Children's Week is to really attempt to raise the visibility of kids in the halls of Congress.
I mean, we've been at this now, I think, 6-7 years. And, every year we do see the drumbeat getting stronger and stronger. It definitely feels like every week is Children's Week in my house. But for First Focus, why is it that we have Children's Week?
Well, the biggest reason is that we're really trying to educate lawmakers about all the issues that are facing kids. We really do try to raise kind of the full array of problems and challenges that children face in our society. So whether it's child health or education, early childhood, family medical leave, international children's issues, just the whole array of things that we're trying to bring to the attention of members of Congress. In the past and even this year, we're trying to we talk about it as in terms of like the hashtag, every issue is a children's issue. So we really do fundamentally believe that almost any issue you think about, there's a kid angle that's often being ignored or neglected.
And I think to add to that, what makes First Focus uniquely positioned to lead this effort or be among, the leaders to really highlight Children's Week is our unique connection to the broader child advocacy community and organizations, through our coalitions, be it issue specific or across the board. Our reach is pretty wide. And so even for the broader child advocacy community, it's been very interesting to see their take on Children's Week over the last several years and how even for them, it's getting to be something that they will, lean on and look to us every June as we start to kind of gear up for the week.
Yeah, to give their listeners a sense of the extent of that. So how many coalitions are we involved in?
The last time we checked, it was a nice, neat 40, a round number of 40 coalitions that we are a part of. Actually, it will be more than that because it's 40 that we are a part of. We have created and lead several others. So I think probably in total, it's about 45, close to 45.
It really does get back to, in a past podcast, Celinda Lake did talk about one of the challenges kid advocates face is that the array of issues is so much larger for kids than it is necessarily for seniors. And so when we think about senior citizens issues, people think Social Security, Medicare. And for kids, it's really this fuller array of things. And that's what we're really trying to raise people's attention to. So we tend to like to use hashtags like Commit to Kids and every issue is a kids issue and, invest in kids to really try to highlight for people what are some of these challenges and solutions for addressing the array of problems that kids face?
Yeah. And, I'm very excited for this year's Children's Week. And it brings me back and reminds me of the first time we held the convening last year with the Moms, Dads, and Babies Caucus. That was a strong event and one that really shows the growing trend around really understanding these issues and developing solutions, real policy solutions, again, from across the board, across the aisle, to see real tangible progress for children and families.
Yeah, and in past episodes, again, we had Rosa DeLauro, who's the chairwoman of the Babies Caucus, and now we're having the Dads Caucus, and, we definitely are big supporters of Congresswoman Tlaib as well, and her work on the Mamas Caucus, and so those three caucuses and the role that caucuses play in Congress is to really lift up issues. And so those three caucuses are really big players in helping us promote the key issues of importance to children.
Yeah, it was beautiful to have them come together.
So consequently, we're definitely looking forward to continuing that work with those caucuses and really pleased to have Congressman Gomez on today and, to really lay out his vision for where the Dads Caucus is heading and how, in conjunction with the Babies Caucus and the Mamas Caucus, we can really lift up these issues and make progress for our children. This is Speaking of Kids. Thanks for listening. I'm Bruce Lesley.
And I'm Marcella Chluby. Special thanks to our guest, Representative Jimmy Gomez.
Speaking of Kids is a podcast by First Focus on Children.
Elizabeth Wyndham is the supervising producer, and Julia Wyndham is the associate producer.
Layla Nematala is the advocacy and mobilization producer, and the senior producer is Jay Woodward.
Our theme music is Don't Look Twice by Sam Barsh.
For more information about this week's episode, go to firstfocus.org. You can find all of our links in our show notes.
If you have any thoughts, questions, or interest in becoming a First Focus on Children ambassador, email us at speakingofkids@firstfocus.org.
And please follow, rate, and review on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, or YouTube.
Speaking of Kids is produced by Windhaven Productions and Blue Jay Atlantic.